Dr. Croston, it's Samantha Bragg again. So this will be my video for our fusion paper for PS639. So my paper topic was cyber deterrence and the threat that it poses within the U.S. So as we all know, cybersecurity has become a major priority for almost every nation. With the ease that people are able to acquire information through the cyber realm, an effective and adequate cyber deterrence policy is very necessary in order to protect our infrastructures. The cyber realm is fast and growing, and it's ever changing. So with that being said, the need for deterrence is more than ever due to the unlimited boundaries and ambiguity in cyberspace. Many advisors and officials tend to rely on post-Cold War era nuclear deterrence models for guidance on cyber deterrence. But the apparent need for cyber deterrence is not incredibly new. The Clinton administration noted in its 1997 national security strategy that there was a need to invest in and protect information infrastructures and information systems. Within that same year, it was published that the Department of Defense needed to cooperate with other federal agencies, allies, and even the private industry in order to defend this national security against hostile information operations. So within the following years, there was very little provided regarding guidance or effectiveness to the need for more cyber deterrence. Even the administrations to follow did very little to provide new ideas on how to implement an effective cybersecurity plan. So this is what makes cyber deterrence such a threat in the United States. It's the fact that there is no real effective plan or policy in place, which leaves the U.S. vulnerable to a catastrophic attack, essentially. So the next section within this paper is just kind of goes over, the current policy regarding cybersecurity. So as I previously stated, the Clinton administration was really the first to note the need for cybersecurity. While they believed an attack at that time could not necessarily debilitate the nation's critical infrastructures, the threat was growing at an alarming rate, and the U.S. had little defense against it. So during the Bush administration, there wasn't much published that didn't regard international terrorism due to the 9/11 attacks. However, in 2003, National Strategy to Secure Cyberspace noted specifically which agency should be tasked with what and gave recommendations on how to strengthen national cybersecurity. Also, during the Bush administration, cyberspace was declared a new theater of operations, and that cybersecurity was becoming a fundamental military capability as well. So recently, during the Obama administration, is when we've really seen more being done in regards to cyber deterrence. In 2009, we saw the results of a 60-day cyberspace policy review. This review was responsible for assessing U.S. policies and organizational structures of cybersecurity. Things such as developing a government-wide cyber intelligence plan and defining the role of cybersecurity in private sectors were recommended from the review. And also during the Obama administration in 2010, they noted that the Department of Defense needed to implement a better strategy to provide cyber capabilities that met the need of the warfighter. While it seemed that greater strides were being taken in order to secure our position within the cyber realm, many scholars noted that the verbiage used was pretty much the same as the publishings prior to it. It made little indication that advancements were actually being made regarding cyber issues. So what makes the cyber realm so complex is that it was built without the intention of it ever needing to be secure. While policymakers are attempting to implement an effective cyber deterrence plan, they have to keep in mind that the policy has to keep in accordance with civil liberties and freedoms that cyberspace provides to individuals, both foreign and domestic. It should also be noted that while a policy of deterrence is greatly needed, it could be beneficial to publish a policy of retaliation should an attack occur. A policy of retaliation could also serve as a tactic of deterrence if the enemy is aware of what could happen should they choose to infiltrate U.S. infrastructure. So the next section kind of points out how other nations are handling cyber deterrence and if they are more successful than the United States. So, as I stated, one of the first points I made, cybersecurity is becoming a huge priority for many nations. Nations such as Italy, Germany, France, the UK, and of course the US are taking necessary steps to construct a more effective system which prevents attacks from occurring. So the first nation I discussed for the purposes of this paper is Italy. Much like the US, it realized the need for cybersecurity in the late 1990s, and in 1999 it established a working group of members from the Ministry of Communications, the Ministry of Justice, and the Ministry of Interior. Say that 10 times fast. But this is means to ensure the security of cyber and communication. But it wasn't until about 10 years later that Italy actually created the National Anti-Cybercrime Center for Protection of Critical Infrastructure. And in 2012, the Italian digital agenda was proposed, and things such as the education of citizens, business, and industries regarding risk of the cyber realm were recommended. The next country I examined is Germany. What I found really interesting about Germany is that it's known as a country which actively cooperates with the international organizations such as the European Union, the United Nations, and NATO, and hopes to enhance cybersecurity capabilities of the international community. So much like Italy, Germany created a National Cyber Response Center and was motivated by the interest to secure its critical infrastructures before an attack occurred. The next country we go into is France. And France, compared to Germany and Italy, is a little different in the sense that it strives to become a cyber defense world power. So, like, where Germany may have only been motivated by protecting its own infrastructure rather than becoming a cyber world power like France, the two were actually really similar due to the fact that they both believe in developing an international collaboration incentive with regards to cybersecurity. And then the last nation I evaluate for this section is the UK. So although the prior nations we talked about seem to recognize the issue of cybersecurity and deterrence during the same time frame the US did, the UK really didn't take action on it until 2009 when it published its first cybersecurity strategy. A year later, in 2010, it established its National Cybersecurity Plan, which noted how the nation wished to tackle cybercrimes and make the UK one of the most secure places in the world to do business. So when you review all the policies in the nations mentioned, it would seem that both France and the UK are the most ambitious and eager to ensure their nation is considered one of the most secure in regards to cyber capabilities. So like I said, France and Germany are actively involved in creating international collaboration incentives. While it may seem like an effective way to combat the issues of cybersecurity, I would argue that it requires individual states to ensure that their security perimeters are in place and are adequate enough, because having a collective cyber deterrence effort, that would only be as strong as its weakest link. And with things such as, well, the U.S. would most likely, in an international community effort, would be looked upon as the leader of the collaboration. It would kind of prove difficult since the U.S. has a very vague policy of cybersecurity. So my next section of the paper reviews theories of what scholars believe should happen in regards to cyber deterrence. So, as I stated in the beginning, a lot of people look to the nuclear deterrence model when it comes to cyber deterrence, but the two are very different. Some scholars will argue that the threat is computer to computer, so the psychological threat is missing. Another point that can be made is that the extended deterrence was once executed by demonstration of powers, and so if a nation was to do that within the cyber realm, it could potentially prove counterproductive. So what's so interesting about cyber deterrence is that there are countless theories on how the task should be completed, but there aren't very many case studies. So should there be, an interdependence among major nations and powers regarding cybersecurity? the U.S. as a nation has to specify the do's and don'ts within the cyber realm domestically before it can attempt to lay out the framework for an international declaration. And I use you as a source, so Dr. Crossan himself argues that the United States would be better positioned should it shift to a more open and transparent policy that seeks to infer deterrence efficacy of its offensive cyber capabilities. Many scholars, such as yourself, argue that there must be an offensive and defensive plan in place. So if our adversaries are aware of the repercussions of an act viewed as violent, it may dissuade them from attacking. Another point that makes cyber deterrence such a complicated issue is the lack of attribution. So without it, it makes it incredibly difficult to implement an effective deterrence policy. So the last section of my paper is really my view on how to implement an effective cyber deterrence policy within the United States. So even though it's very difficult to implement a deterrence plan because of the lack of attribution, another issue within the U.S. policy is that the terms are too broad. So there's no real clear-cut definitive action that would be taken against adversaries should an attack occur. Most policy just leaves it very vague in that it will be handled accordingly. It doesn't really say, this will happen if they were to attack this way. Much like what was just stated, most of the documentation published by the U.S. government regarding cybersecurity only concerns defensive strategies rather than outlining offensive strategies and when they would be warranted. And one more thing that I found the U.S. policy is lacking is that it doesn't provide any specificities regarding different adversaries, such as nation states, foreign intelligence, hackers, criminals, or terrorists. So a more clear-cut guideline and policy regarding the type of action that would be taken against these specific group of actors needs to be established if the U.S. wishes to be regarded as a stern adversary to those with malicious intent. And while many scholars recommend collaboration within the international community, that collaboration means that all nations involved will have to have a complete transparent policy and will have to work together for the interest of each nation. So in my opinion, I think this is naive. I don't think any country would put another country's interest before their own. And there's also the issue of not having a defined, definition of an attack or any defined retaliation plans within the international community. There aren't really any in the United States, so it makes it hard to have it internationally as well. And with no real governing international body to hold each nation to any standards or consequence, to hold them accountable, really, the theory of international collaboration just seems a little far-fetched to me. So as previously mentioned, much of the documentation in place just reiterates documentation prior to it. Tactics that were used in an era of nuclear weapons are now being applied in an era of cyber warfare, and the two drastically differ. So current policy really needs to reflect those differences and incorporate new tactics that are able to accurately solve the problem. And lastly, I note that the U.S. needs to regard the situation as a one-of-a-kind and face it head-on. So preventative measures need to be perfected and resiliency plans should be put in place. And the focus should not only be on the offense but also on the defense, and not necessarily in light of retaliation, but in denying benefits to attackers. So that's pretty much for this paper. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a great week break, and I'll see you next semester.